Hey movie geeks, I hope you're having a good day. Back in 1984, James Cameron changed the world with the iconic classic The Terminator.
Come with me if you want to live.
Let's take a look back at why this sci-fi horror masterpiece has never been forgotten and why it's still so relevant to this day. In the run-up to the release of his film Piranha 2, director James Cameron came down ill whilst in Rome and ended up experiencing a vivid fever dream that would change his life and the movie business forever. Cameron dreamt of a metallic torso holding kitchen knives, dragging itself away from an explosion. When he awoke, Cameron realised he had just dreamt up the basis for the terrifying villain of the Terminator. He decided he had to write a script around the idea despite not being a big director or having a decent budget behind him. However, he was inspired by John Carpenter's 1978 low-budget horror Halloween and decided to push forward with the premise despite the lack of funds. While sleeping on the couch of his friend, science fiction writer Randall Frakes, Cameron wrote the first draft for the Terminator. When developing the script, Cameron enlisted the help of his screenwriter friend, William Wisher, who actually went on to have a tiny role in the movie as the police officer who confronts Carl Reese when he first arrives in 1984. Originally, the Terminator script consisted of two Terminators being sent to the past, one being the Terminator who is actually in the film and another made of liquid metal, but Cameron felt the technology of the time was not sufficient to create the visuals needed. Of course, the liquid metal Terminator did eventually show up in the iconic sequel, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, released in 1991. Gail Ann Hurd, who had previously worked at New World Pictures, showed some interest in the project, and Cameron sold the rights to her for the ridiculous amount of $1, which he said he ultimately regretted. What were you thinking, James? Hurd managed to get Orion Pictures interested, but they stipulated they would only distribute the movie if Cameron could find financial backing elsewhere. Chairman and President of Hemdale Film Corporation John Daly expressed interest and agreed to finalise the deal when Cameron went all out at the pitch meeting. The director convinced his friend, actor Lance Henriksen, to show up at the meeting acting like the Terminator. Henriksen wore a leather jacket, had fake cuts on his face and gold foil on his teeth. Daly was blown away by Cameron's commitment and creativity and agreed to back the film with help from Orion, with the original budget sitting at $4 million but being eventually raised to $6.5 million. Of course, it has been said for years that Henriksen was the original choice for the Terminator. However, this is in fact not true, and the rumour started due to this event when Henriksen helped Cameron out, but he was never going to be the Terminator. Arnold Schwarzenegger was suggested by Orion to play Carl Reese, Sarah Connor's soldier protector. Cameron was cautious, however, as Schwarzenegger's star was majorly on the rise, and he felt he would need someone even more known to play the Terminator, with names such as Sylvester Stallone and Mel Gibson in the mix, both of which turned down the role.
No, it isn't possible.
What's not possible? He's fantastic. This is his best performance ever.
Other names were considered, one of them being O.J. Simpson, and the story is now iconic that Cameron did not feel Simpson would be believable as a killer. This of course turned out to be incredibly ironic considering the future events involving O.J. Simpson. Yeah, Cameron met Schwarzenegger and thus began a decades-long friendship, slowly coming round to the fact that Schwarzenegger should not play Carl Reese, but the Terminator, as he and Arnold were on the same page about how the character should be portrayed.
And the funny thing was, when I went to that lunch, I didn't see that as you know, in the back of my mind, I was thinking the Terminator, you were thinking the Terminator, but we sit and we have this polite lunch because we've never met each other, and neither one of us mentions it, right? And then we both go back to our guys and say, Terminator!
Schwarzenegger, while confident he could play the Terminator, was not as passionate as Cameron about the project, at one point calling the Terminator some shit movie I'm doing for a few weeks. He has gone on to say he regrets not being as excited as Cameron was, and if he had known it would go on to be his most famous role, he would have of course looked at it more favourably. In Schwarzenegger's defence, Cameron was not a big director at the time, and of course initially the Terminator does indeed just sound like a low budget B picture, not something that would go on to change movies forever. The role of Carl Reese was vacant again, and James Cameron considered rock musician Sting, who had appeared in a few gritty films by then, including Dune and Quadrophenia. However, Sting turned down the role due to Cameron's unknown status. Other names in the mix for Reese included Superman himself Christopher Reeve, Kurt Russell, Tommy Lee Jones, Matt Dillon, and even, believe it or not, Bruce Springsteen. mental. Cameron eventually settled on Michael Biehn, an actor he would go on to work with again in Aliens and the Abyss. Biehn said he, like Arnold, early on saw the film as a B picture, but as he got to know Cameron, he knew it was a lot bigger than that. Canadian actress Lisa Langlois was offered the role of Sarah Connor but turned it down as she was filming romantic comedy The Slugger's Wife. Melissa Sue Addison and Jessica Harper's names floated around, and Leah Thompson and Rosanna Arquette actually auditioned for the role. In the end, James Cameron settled on Linda Hamilton, who was fresh off shooting Children of the Corn. Because of his gratitude for Henriksen securing financing with his Terminator cosplay, Cameron also found a role for him, casting him as a police officer named Vukovich. Early on, Orion Pictures put forward 2 suggestions. One Cameron accepted, one he did not. He was happy to honour their wishes to emphasise the romance between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor, but was not keen on including a robot pet android for Reese. Yeah, that definitely wouldn't have worked in this sort of film. Filming for The Terminator was delayed in early 1983 because Schwarzenegger was unavailable, filming Conan the Destroyer at the time. Cameron filled the time well, writing the script for Rambo First Blood Part 2, meeting the producers to discuss making Aliens, and finally, refining the Terminator script. Fair play, James, fair play. Filming began in March 1984 in Los Angeles. Cameron said as soon as Schwarzenegger arrived on the set, things became larger than life and he could visualise the project being a success. Sadly, Linda Hamilton sprained her ankle early on in filming, and of course pretty much all of Sarah Connor's scenes involve her having to run. Hamilton's ankle was taped up every day, and she spent most of the film in great pain. Hats off to Linda Hamilton, she's a badass, but also I must say hearing that kind of adds to the convincing performance because as she was in constant pain, the desperation is written all over her face, so the character's struggle feels even more authentic. Famous special effects legend Stan Winston was hired to create the visual effects in the movie, but actually ended up not straying too far from Cameron's original design for the character. The stop motion sequences were developed by a company called Fantasy 2, who intended to make the skeletal frame of the Terminator have as similar as possible movements to what we see Arnold Schwarzenegger doing on screen. The iconic scene where the Terminator fixes his injuries was done with a puppet that took 6 months to create. What they achieved with this model was incredible. I really appreciate the time they took. There's haunting strangeness to this scene, and while it doesn't look flawless these days, the decisions Cameron makes in this scene work to elevate the effects, but more on that later. The Terminator had several deleted scenes. 2 of these gave the idea of Skynet and the future war some more background. The first scene shows Sarah locating Cyberdyne as she went on to do in Terminator 2. She tries to convince Carl that they should destroy the building in order to prevent the future war, but Reese makes it clear his mission is to conserve the future and not change it. The second deleted scene reveals that the owner of Cyberdyne finds the Terminator's microchip after Sarah has crushed the machine in the film's culmination. The scenes were part of a subplot in which Sarah and Carl do eventually agree to blow up Cyberdyne, and this was actually the reason they were shown making bombs in the film. It was originally to dispose of Cyberdyne. When the characters end up outside Cyberdyne while on the run from the Terminator, it wasn't a coincidence. This subplot actually ended up in the film's novelisation, and of course went on to be the major plot point in Terminator 2. Cameron ended up cutting the scenes, so if you got the chance to make a sequel, which he of course did, he had an entire plot thread to open up the world of the Terminator. The Terminator was released on October 26, 1984 in the United States, playing at 1,005 theatres and shooting to the top of the box office, and ultimately achieving an incredible 78 million worldwide from its 6 million budget. Not bad at all. In the run-up to the film's release, Orion Pictures did not have much confidence in the Terminator, and were also dreading a negative critical reception. While the movie was indeed a huge success, Orion were maybe half right, as the critical response at the time was mixed. Janet Maslin of the New York Times criticised the brutal nature of the film, and the Pittsburgh Press remarked that it was full of artsy ugliness. However, it did receive very good reviews from the Los Angeles Times, who called the Terminator a cracking thriller, and also the Milwaukee Journal deemed the film the most chilling science fiction thriller since Alien. Famous movie review team of Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel had a surprising reaction to the film, with Ebert liking it more than Siskel, and Siskel's criticism being a bit bizarre, to be honest.
And it takes the whole idea of time travel and makes it into kind of a bittersweet sort of thing.
Yeah.
Plus, non-stop action, which is probably why the movie is #1 at the box office. So, as an action picture, I thought it was pretty well made.
As an action picture, I thought it was not particularly well made, but the love story, you're right, is kind of nice.
The action was routine in The Terminator? What were you on, Gene, considering every filmmaker on Earth would be imitating this action for the next decade, including Cameron himself? I don't know what film you were watching, brother.
Are you okay?
Better than you were the day that you liked Starship Troopers.
Okay. Oh, no.
The Terminator was such a brave and ambitious piece of work, and James Cameron was lucky it was the 80s, because that's probably one of the only times you could have such a dark and nihilistic film be such a game-changing smash hit. Led by an intense electronic score, frantic pace, and the constant feeling that you can't relax, the film is far from being just an 80s B-movie, which is perhaps what people were expecting. The Terminator contained elements of what we had seen before, but so much the film was original and devastatingly so. The film was a shotgun blast through the genre and through film in general. You could say it didn't require much acting for Schwarzenegger to pull off playing the Terminator, but I disagree. This was a new kind of performance. He was required to play a character who had no empathy, no emotion and no feeling, and Schwarzenegger carefully tapped into the little nuances and gestures that would make that work. His movements are precise and calculated. The way Arnold portrays the Terminator as laser focused on his mission and nothing else is one of the strongest elements of the performance. Nothing gets in his way of hunting for Sarah. The Terminator is just moving forward, deliberately and methodically, for the entire film. He doesn't stop to consider or think. Everything he does is either just getting another step closer to Sarah, or repairing himself so he can continue searching for Sarah. There is nothing for the Terminator to do or say other than his mission, and Arnold does incredibly well at conveying the tunnel vision, and he brings such an uncompromising killer instinct to the character. Like Kyle Reese says, finding Sarah is all the Terminator exists to do.
That Terminator is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead.
Many have likened the first Terminator to a horror film more than a sci-fi action movie, and it's easy to see why. The Terminator is a terrifying villain, nearly indestructible, so he reminds us of the slasher antagonists of the past. There are also scenes where the Terminator stalks his prey slowly and methodically, just as those killers did. And of course there are gruesome and violent killing scenes. The movie also has a strong final girl in Sarah Connor, who starts off meek and mild and ends up seasoned and strong because of her experience. And of course Sarah takes final girls to a whole new level because she's not just a survivor, she's the mother of the future. She becomes someone we root for, not just because she makes it through, but because the very fate of humanity relies on her survival. So with all these common tropes, the Terminator is clearly a horror film too, but it took what we had seen in slashers in a completely new direction. We are dealing with a new kind of villain, not just a man or a monster, but technology itself turning on humanity in the most brutal and uncompromising way. That idea forces you to sit up and take notice, as now the threat is not just a killer targeting people, but an existential, all-encompassing boogeyman looming over the head of all of humanity. Linda Hamilton really is perfect as Sarah Connor. She's incredibly normal, kind and sweet. She's the last person you'd expect to be the mother of the saviour of the human race. And I love that all through the Terminator movies, it's never great, powerful people who are the heroes, because obviously Sarah and eventually John in T2, these are incredibly normal people, but they both just have very good hearts. And I really appreciate the idea that it's kind-hearted humans, who are the ones that ultimately see the world through to victory in the end, not the ones with the most money or power. In fact, in the Terminator movies, these people were almost always presented as the problem that got us into this point in the first place, where machines can take over. Michael Biehn is also fantastic as Kyle Reese. Reese knows what the Terminator is capable of. He has seen the devastation with his own eyes. I've realised watching the film today that you can kind of liken Kyle Reese to Dr. Loomis from Halloween. He's ranting and raving to everyone around him about the evil that's coming, but no one believes him, and this only makes him rant and rave even more. Bihn's performance is genuine, believable. You take one look at him and you believe he has seen a terrifying future. All he has ever known is the horrific scenes we are given flashbacks to, but he doesn't have time to dwell on it. His whole life is just survival.
We're survivors. Here. There. Nobody even knew who started it. It was the machine, Sarah.
Sarah Connor manages to break down the walls and gives Reese seemingly his first human relationship. It's a very emotional and charming moment in a very dark film. It means a lot to see her break through the barriers he has built up and meet the real person. Sarah teaches Reese how to feel again, and Reese teaches Sarah the importance of never giving up, to the point where by the end of the film Sarah is the one dragging the injured Reese along, refusing to let him give up. It's a heartwarming romance, to be honest, and you don't expect the Terminator to have a genuine love story underneath all the dark and dismal themes, but I think it deserves to be remembered for having that too.
I came across time for you, Sarah. I love you. I always have.
The film was incredibly ahead of its time and is so relevant now with our current anxiety about AI in the future. It's spooky how much this movie nails the worries that a lot of people have, and this was 1984. James Cameron really was a visionary with this script, and it's for that reason that the Terminator still resonates. The message is still haunting, the anxieties have become even more realised in our present day world, and will continue to grow, and because of this the Terminator is a piece of work that's becoming timeless, while a lot of other 80s properties are now quite dated.
Fuck you, asshole.
And while the effects specifically in the scene in which the Terminator takes his eye out and replaces it look somewhat less real today, you can't deny what was achieved back here, and Cameron makes sure it doesn't even matter, you're not even focused on whether it looks real or not. He makes so many genius decisions in that scene, such as when he cuts away to a shot of the water-filled basin with blood dripping into it, and dissolving into the progressively reddening liquid. He creates such a mood, slowly but surely, and you're just watching something so horrific that you've never seen before, and you're just staring at the screen in shock. With several loud squelching sounds, the eye finally emerges as a red glossed over mass that the machine lets fall into the basin, with a repulsive plopping sound. The audience is completely focused on the insane thing the character is doing, so that enhances the effects because Cameron doesn't give you a chance to judge them or decide if they look real. The impact of the situation is much more important than whether the effects are perfect. I think it's easy to take the Terminator's action scenes for granted when of course the film's sequel is one of the greatest action movies ever made. I love the wonderful first car chase where in between swerving to escape the machine, Carlo's explained to Sarah who he and the Terminator are. Cameron cuts between the cars so well, it's not so fast you can't breathe, but it's enough to build up this impending sense of doom and conveys the stress and tension of the situation. You're just thrust into this what the hell situation, you're thrilled by the action and chase, but your mind is working and you're getting more and more invested and wanting to know what's going on. Cameron is perfect at making action not throwaway, but a part of the story. Also love the chase scene in the tunnel where we see Arnold in his iconic Terminator gear for the first time, on a motorcycle chasing Carl and Sarah, who are desperately hurling pipe bombs at him. I love the vulnerability and desperation and scrappiness of the action scenes in this movie. By the second film, the hero is still an underdog, but he can still fight the villain. Whereas here, Kyle has none of his weapons from the future, and Sarah isn't the Sarah of the future yet. Kyle has no chance whatsoever against the Terminator, so it's quite literally a soldier relying on his own resourcefulness and nothing else in the face of the most dangerous force on the planet. The stakes just feel incredibly high, and the action is so kinetic and full of frenzy, as every decision taken by Kyle is just using whatever is around him that can help him get a bit further ahead, even for just 30 seconds of the machine. The future scenes look truly nightmarish, and I can't imagine people watching this in the 80s, it must have blown their minds. It looks fantastic now, let alone then. And they've really missed the trick not making a Terminator movie actually set in this war. What was Terminator Salvation thinking? Have a Terminator movie in this war. Not in broad daylight, not in different looking landscapes. This war. Why not? Terminator Genesis sort of has it at the start of the movie. They sort of recreate this, and it's actually the best part of Terminator Genesis. And then they just don't have the bravery to go all the way with it. This is the way to go if you're ever going to do the Terminator again, but it has to be this nighttime, horrific situation where you can't imagine anyone surviving for one moment. Humans are living literally like cockroaches. And I love the dismal nature of the Terminator because the future could have been bad but still have some hope beneath the surface. But no, in the Terminator, when you see the future, there's nothing to believe in. In fact, one of the only pieces of hope Kyle Reese has is a photo of Sarah which he has to watch burn. He can't even have that comfort anymore. John Connor is mentioned several times, and he is of course the only beacon of light, but we never see him and he's not really explored. So even hearing about John doesn't fill us with hope or get us off the hook. Hearing about him instead fills us with a sense of, oh thank God there was someone, But it doesn't sound like John's life was spectacular either. Even though he won, we don't get the feeling that there was much for him to even win back. Of course, the second film starts to bring in some more optimistic ideas in regard to John, the future and morality. But in this first film, any glimmers of hope are fleeting moments that are gone as quick as they came. But that makes this film stand out. It's a brave and ambitious work, and it needed to be this dark so that the slightly more hopeful sequel worked as well as it did, opening up a more sensitive side to the Terminator saga. With the Terminator, James Cameron was fully dedicated to the idea of a ticking time bomb, a future bearing down a constant Grim Reaper hunting for humanity. Not only is Sarah being relentlessly chased through the film, humanity is too, because the Terminator represents our inevitable fate. There's no room for hope, not yet. That will come later. For now, this is a film that grabs you by the throat and only loosens its grip for a few milliseconds at a time. You are completely at the film's mercy, and after you've experienced the Terminator, because it is an experience, your movie watching life will never be the same. What do you think of the Terminator? Where do you place it in film history? What's your experience of the film? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you love retrospectives and analysis for movie geeks, and I'll see you guys next time.